Yes, but not your slides, actually. There we go. There's your slides. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. So good evening. I will be presenting tonight my capstone project, and it will be around the study of the French wine importation supply chain during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the table of contents. I will start with a small introduction. So as we know, the international supply chain is a very complex system from its phase one till the consumption of the wine. And in my project, I will be focusing on both the production and importation of the French wine to the United States and the issues that were faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the motivation was to understand how is the process, the global importation of the supply chain, especially in the restaurant business. So in those two figures, we can see the variations in sales and shipment between 2019 and 2020. The first one will present the US wine sales, and the second, the direct-to-customer shipment volume. The gray curve represents the 2019, and the blue curve represents the 2020. And as we can see in both, there was a huge drop in the month of March, which is when the pandemic started. So the problem statement was what was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the production and importation of French wine to the United States. And with this problem statement, there are three objectives I'm trying to achieve. First, study the normal process of the production, then study the global supply chain and the international logistics related to the wine importation, and finally, analyze the challenges and issues faced during the pandemic. And the idea of this project was originated because I worked as a server in a French restaurant. And in this project, I applied some of the concepts from the logistics and the distribution course, such as the global supply chain and international logistics. I will start with a small introduction of the three-tier supply chain system. The grape growers and the wineries represent the top tier of the system. They are responsible of the production of the wine. And then in the middle tier comes the importers and the distributors. So the importer is an agent that is licensed and authorized to buy the wine and bring the wine into the United States from foreign manufacturers. And then the distributor can be either a person or a business that is authorized to buy those goods. And his role is to resell those finished goods to the retailers, which represent the bottom tier in this system. The retailer can be either a restaurant, a liquor store, or a bar. And in our case, it's a restaurant. In this figure, it represents the whole supply chain. I will just represent briefly each actor. So the grape grower is responsible of growing the grapes and harvesting the grapes. And then the wine producer will be responsible of the elaboration of the wine. The bulk distributor will receive the wine in barrels. He will be responsible of tasting, analyzing, and then rejecting or accepting the wine. The transit seller will be responsible of the storage of the wine, the bulk wine. The filler and packer will be responsible of the packaging. And then comes the freight forwarder, who is responsible of the shipment planning to get the best route to the final destination. The freight operator is responsible of bringing good service transportation. And the importer, as we said before, is responsible of buying the wine from the manufacturer or the wine producer. And then the wholesaler will buy it from the importer and resell it to the retailer, which is the restaurant. And I collected my data to this project thanks to my meetings with the CEO of the company, my meetings with the manager of the restaurant, as well as my own research that I did to try to understand the whole process of the wine supply chain. So in this curve, we can see the wine consumption during the 2020 year. Of course, the first 2 months, it was almost $100,000 of sales. Like it was a very high demand and it was normal. And then in March, there was the total lockdown and the restaurant was closed for almost 2 months and a half. Around mid-May, it opened again for carry-out only. And during this time, there was a law that prohibited the sale of alcohol, but it was lifted just to help the restaurant to increase their sales. During the beginning of June, the restaurant opened for outdoor dining. So we can see an increase in sales of wine for around $50,000, and it kept increasing for the whole summer season. And during the month of September, the restaurants were allowed to open as 25% capacity inside. So we can see an increase in sales because the restaurant was open for both outdoor and indoor dining. And during October, it opened as a 50% capacity inside, which helped a lot to increase their sales. So if you compare the month of October to the month before the pandemic, it was almost the same. Because if there were 50% inside and outdoor dining, so it's almost like a full capacity in the restaurant. And then we can see a drop again in November, and that was because of the rainy days and the snowy days. Outdoor dining wasn't available anymore. And finally, for December, there was the lockdown again, but the restaurant was still open for carry-out. And next to the holidays like Christmas and New Year's, the sales were good. So 36,000 is a good amount for wine sales. And then I did this figure to mention the purchase of the wine by the glass, to compare it, the wine by the glass and the wine by the bottle. So before the pandemic, the purchase for both wine served by the glass and by the bottle was high. When they opened again for carry out, the purchase was very low because the restaurant wanted to sell all the unsold stock that they already have. And the first 4 months after the opening, they focused on the purchase of the wine served by the glass, where the demand was very high. And they kept selling all the unsold wine by the bottle. But after selling all the stock that they have, they had to restock everything again. So it was high again. I will explain this slide very briefly. I just want to focus on the seasonality of the wine over here. As we can see, the red wine has always the highest percentage, but we can see that during the summer season, there was a decrease of the red wine and increase of white and rosé. So this is due to the seasonality. And then when the weather was warmer, the red wine was increased again, and white and rosé were decreasing. Okay, and for my analysis, so we can say that the COVID-19 had a lot of disruptions in the whole wine supply chain. It affected each actor in the supply chain. So first, we can say that it affected the grape growers because of lack of staff to pick the grapes and harvest the grapes. It affected the wine producers because they had a big amount of wine stocked in the wineries that couldn't be moved at the time. On the importation side, there were a lot of challenges. First, there was shortages of cargo containers due to canceled sailings. And they were respecting the social distancing at ports of exports and imports, which caused delays to unload the products. Then there was a lot of restrictions for the number of truck drivers in the port. And finally, there was an inability to obtain replacement parts for vessel maintenance. And third, on the political side, the major issue was the enactment of the 25% import tariffs in October 2019. So as a result, I can say that the restaurant never saw a big variations in the demand of the wine like it saw in 2020 because of the pandemic. So there was an uncertainty of demand, and this was because of the different phases of closing and reopening the restaurant, as well as the reduced capacity of the people dining in the restaurant. Those are a few of my recommendations. So the first one is carrying a greater inventory in the key products, which in our case are the wine sold by the glass. So in this case, the customer doesn't have to change to another product that is not familiar with. Second is evaluating existing and new distributors, which is very important to study their quick response to keep the supply maintained. And then assessing safety stock levels, which means that the restaurant has always to invest in the products where the demand is very high and not to invest in the low demand products. And finally, adopting a new way to forecast and plan inventory. So now in 2021, the restaurant is still following the same restrictions it followed in 2020. But later, when most of the population or all the population will be vaccinated, everything will be back to normal. So the restaurant has to anticipate and plan their demand for the wine when everything will be back to normal. So as a conclusion, I can say that the process of importation and international supply chain had its own issues and risks before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, the restaurants did their best and they did a great job. They followed good steps to keep the restaurant and the business going. And all the charts and the data that I showed you during my presentations are an easy compilation to try to understand all this process and how it went during this pandemic. And I would like to thank Dr. Han, my advisor, for assessing me this whole semester to achieve this project. I would like to thank as well Tony Foreman, who is the CEO of the Foreman Wolf Company, and Patrick Delval, who is the manager of Petit Louis Bistro. And those are the references that I used to get all the information I needed during this project. And thank you so much.
Great. Questions for Yara?
I have a question, if I may.
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
Yara, thank you. On your sales data, was that based on one restaurant, or was that all the Foreman Group restaurants? And then,
No,
like the units, was that in dollars?
yes, this was in dollars, and it was focused on Petit Louis Bistro, just one restaurant, because the Foreman Wolf has different restaurants. So, but the
Right.
Petit Louis Bistro is the only French restaurant, and I was focusing on the French wine specifically.
Gotcha. And then, so when it says 0 March, April, May, I mean, were they just closed during that time?
Yes, the restaurant was totally closed for dine-in, carry-out.
And then I'll just ask one more. I'm sure other people have questions. But Petit Louis Bistro, now, does that only sell French wine, or do they sell other wines?
Just French wine.
Okay. Thank you. I'm in the industry too. This was really great. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, sure, you're welcome. Any other question for me?
Hey, Yara, can you go back to the third slide where it was I didn't get enough chance to look at that data. The very first one where you had the charts like direct, it was more direct to consumer, or
Oh, yeah,
that
this
first one?
Mhm.
Yeah. So what is the second chart telling us? Like I got the first one, but the second one was more, is that direct to consumer shipment volume? Does that mean that there were more people? Explain that one.
Yeah, it was direct to consumer. So how much the consumer was purchasing wine.
Is that from their data as well? No, that's not. That's from
This is in general. It's not
Got it.
specifically about the restaurant. Yeah, and in general in the United States.
Got it. Okay, cool.
So staying with that chart again and comparing both of them, you're saying that the wine sales to the
Mhm.
distributors was down, I'm going to say in April of 2020 because of the reasons that you cited. But it looks like all of us that were stuck at home were buying as much wine as possible in April of 2020 because the shipments are spiking in April direct to consumer where it plummeted in April with US wine sales. Is that the correct analysis?
Okay, so those two curves show the wines in the United States in general. So you can still, maybe the liquor stores were still open, or you can buy wine online as well. So
Right.
this is not just related to the restaurants when it was closed.
Okay, so again, the left-hand chart is saying based upon shipments, restrictions, et cetera, whether they're ports of call or otherwise, the volume of sales was way down in April of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
However, the consumer was still clearing the shelves in the liquor stores in 2020. I mean, I can point you to my basement and point this out. So this is exactly what I would have anticipated.
Okay.
I would confirm that being in the retail
Right.
industry, March and April was like December. You know, but I'm sure you guys are familiar with the seasonality of that.
Right. So I'm glad to say I drove your curve way up.
Okay.
Any other questions for Yara?
So Yara, I just say that those are good, very good comments given that slide. So whenever we put up a graph, we need to be able to interpret and anticipate more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. My
Well, thank you, Yara. This was very interesting. So
Thank you. Am I still sharing my screen? Yes.
you are. Yeah, let me see if I can turn you off too. I don't know.
I
There you
did.
go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you, Yara. Appreciate it. Well done.